Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
Having that internal monologue when you're tired, you're getting physically hurt, and like I say, try and bringing that needle into line is the challenge, and I think that only comes through experience.
Today I'm joined by judoka Alex Paske. Judoka, not heard the word? Somebody who does judo. Alex and I sit down to talk about flow states in fight sports. The Olympic Games are about to kick off in Paris this week, and I thought it'd be a good topic to get into because we all experience flow when we practice creativity, but we don't often correlate that with sports and broader life. And this is a great conversation that does a wonderful job of knitting the two together. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? Welcome to the show. My name is Ben Talon. I am your host. This is the Creative Condition podcast. How are things with you? I hope you're well. Finally, a bit of sunshine outside my studio, and it's good for the soul. I was down a bit of a rabbit hole just this morning. It's been another weird year in terms of workflow as an illustrator, and with AI on the horizon, and you'll have heard the conversation last week with Alex Miles Davis, digital and social media trainer, where we got into the revolution that is AI, and it's something that's been a common topic on this show over the last few weeks as I've been in states of paranoia and fear, and then returning back to a grounded base of optimism, and how the challenge is, in fact, to find our place within this new landscape. But that's not going to be easy. And that's why I'm continuing to drill down into the core aspects of creativity on this show, as opposed to anything overtly business. You know I like to keep it that way. I had a wonderful conversation this week with Carlos Moreno, who is the pioneer of the 15-minute city, and his brand new book of exactly that title is out, and I've read it. I got an advance review copy some time ago. It's wonderful. Do you know, there was a lot of resistance to this, wasn't there? I don't know if you saw that, but there were people protesting against this idea of the 15-minute city. We'll get into that properly on the episode. I find it weird because at its core, this idea is, it sings to me. It's about community and about local amenities, reducing emissions, and building societies around happiness and leisure and family time, as opposed to long, arduous, soul-sapping commutes. And Carlos laid that out brilliantly. We got into the idea of community hubs to break down divisions in society, creativity at the core of that, how none of us really want to be sat on smoggy roads at 6 o'clock coming home from work and missing our kids' bedtime and all that kind of stuff. And yet there's this whole school of thought that this is a big government, locking us all in the city. I don't know where that idea has really come from. People have sent me links to talks. I'll always listen. I always try to appreciate the voice of the other. But I have to say, I don't really get it. I think this is a climate first initiative, and a lot of the kind of resistance to this seems a little inflated to me, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. That's not what this show's about. But yeah, along those lines, that's what we're doing this week. I'm talking to Alex Paske, who is a judoka, which is a word I learned when I didn't know whether I should be calling him a judoist or a judo warrior. I don't know. So I didn't know what the term was, and I found it was judoka. So I met Alex on my local dog walk, and it took me a long time to pluck up the courage to ask him about his cauliflower ears. I didn't know whether he'd just been a bit of a scrapper at school or a rugby man, or I didn't know what it was, and it's not something you just sort of outright ask somebody. But as luck would have it, we went for a beer, we got along well, and I found out it's because he's been spending all those years and decades on the mat, grappling, scrapping in a professional context. And you know me, I had to find the creative angle. And one of our conversations was about flow states. Now, Alex and I are mutual friends with Dan Kieran, who you might have heard on this show going back to, I think, episode 179, but correct me if I'm wrong on that one. And we got talking about that. So I asked him about the years, and it turns out he's been a fighter for a long time. And we all talked about flow, and I've always found sports a great example of creativity and about mindfulness and about loads of lessons we can apply to creativity, and it's something I've always done, borrowed from my sports fandom and the inspiration I take from that. So I got talking to Alex, and before we knew it, we were sat in his living room having a conversation, and I do apologise because this is a kind of Zoom mic stuck on a table between us in a living room, because I didn't initially plan to use this as a podcast. This was research for the Creative Condition book. But the conversation was so good that I always planned to release it. And now that the Olympics are going on this week, it seemed like the right time to do so. So I think you're going to find this one fascinating. I want to get your feedback on it. So do hit me up, hello@bentalon.com, or on the social media, predominantly LinkedIn these days, also on Instagram @bentalon, or @creativecondition_ on Instagram. You can follow the Creative Condition newsletter on Instagram, on LinkedIn now. And do grab the book, bentalonwriter.com/shop for your signed copies, or Kindle for the ebooks. But I love your feedback on this one, so please do get in touch. Some great responses to Andrew Miles Davies last week, talking digital media, marketing, social media, and all that stuff, because I must admit I find it ever more flummoxing as, things like AI rise up. A big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. Been here since day one. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com, and also their Trend X report, which is going to be quite important, I think, in the coming months. We're all noticing the impact of AI as it is integrated into agencies, and certain jobs are reshaped, some jobs are lost. What's it going to mean for us illustrators? We are still finding out at this moment in time. There's, justified concern just now. I must admit, I'm rather, worried about not so much replication of my own style, but the ubiquity and affordability of AI presenting myriad options, whereas I might be seen as something of a luxury and an expensive commodity, whereas once upon a time people were happy to pay it for the service that they saw as valuable. So that's a conversation I want to keep going, moving forwards. Also supporting the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua, if you want to help those guys out by supporting the Ukrainian creative community at this horrible time of hardship. That's about it. Enough rambling from me. We've got loads of good shows coming up. I've been busy recently. I'm producing a highlights episode, a full-length episode, and also a what we learned episode now of every episode. So it's a bit more time-consuming, but I hope you're liking that kind of triple forked format. Seems to be getting some good responses, and all three are, relatively popular. So great stuff. Also looking for new partners of the show. So if you've got a business that is aligned with this cause of elevating creativity's role in society and well-being, give me a shout. I'd love to have you on board. Along with Illustration X and the Ukrainian Institute, you're in good company. Anyway, enough prattling from me. Alex Paske, judoka, talking flow states in fight sports.
I think the time thing is slightly for judo, when because you are set, you do it to the clock, like you've got a 5-minute fight or whatever, so sort of how long you are, and you'll always look up when you get brought together and the referee pauses you, brings you back to the centre or whatever. So the time thing, I guess, sort of you can stay acknowledged with time. I think that's probably an important point, is with judo, when you're fighting, it is kind of potentially slightly different to other fighting sports, in that it's maybe 15, 20, 30, max 40-second bursts of like energy and craziness. But then you get you get paused because either you're heading out the area, or you're not progressing on the ground, or whatever, or someone has a penalty, and you get brought back to the centre, and that's in that time the coaches are allowed to speak to you while you're fighting. It's changed over the years, the rules. So previously coaches have been able to speak to you while you're fighting, and now it's kind of only during that pause. So that's probably, something that I can reflect on here in terms of flow state, is that the ability for a coach to have input actually now in these new rules is much greater, because you've stopped, you're out of action, you're walking back to the position, you're doing your kit up, whatever, and they're giving input. But when you're fighting, like a way to know that you're not in the flow state is because you can hear everything the coach is telling you when you're fighting. And it's the same, if you've got spectators in the crowd. If you're hearing the crowd too much, or you can pick out voices, and that's the thing, you'll have your home team in the crowd, and if you can pick out specific voices, you're not doing that flow state. And so other things that sort of jump out from that bit, it's like it's I thought about it the other day, and there's a game that we used to play at school called The Game, and if you think of the game, you've lost the game. That's the game. And I feel like that's somewhat like this, in that if you become aware that you're in flow state or optimal performance state or whatever you think the minute you become aware of it, you stray away from it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that before, where you almost have that internal monologue of like, I'm going to win this fight. This is going well, I'm going to win this. And then, but you become aware of that internal monologue, and you're like, no, I need to get back to almost the no monologue state. And it's what you find is it's like an internal psychological struggle. Put aside all the physical stuff you're getting beaten the hell out of, and like you're really knackered or whatever. You're trying to fight the internal monologue of like trying to not succumb to the pressure of coaches, spectators, your own pressures, and you sort of hyping yourself up. On like one side, that's the negativity stuff, all the way through to the positive self-talk of, I'm going to win this. He's weak, he's tired, I'm stronger. Like, that's good self-talk, but you're not concentrating on the task at hand, which is that flow state. And good examples of that are when I've won fights and I've had to watch back, and it goes to that kind of autonomous state. I've won fights and you have to watch the video back to know exactly what happened, because you kind of knew, I'd known that I threw them or I landed in a certain position, but it's the video that you watch to really go through, oh, okay, cool, I did that thing. And inevitably, that's the thing that I've trained. I would go beyond 1,000 times. I'd go closer to tens of thousands of times. It's the movement that you've trained. And again, something that I often say is practice makes permanent, not perfect. So if you practice in a focused way to create perfection, that will make it permanent. But if you don't, and that's why training hours are so important, in that you've got to train in a perfect way, because if you do it imperfectly, you will execute that imperfect thing in the heat of the moment when you're trying to be autonomous. So it's what's really comforting as an athlete is seeing that autonomous activity executed perfectly when you weren't aware it was happening, because then you've practiced that enough, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or in that particular scenario.
Yeah, almost animal instinct.
Yeah. It's like doing A-level PE, you speak about motor programs, and it's the video cassette in your head. It just goes and you do it.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you aspire to as an athlete. And this is where I'm very biased with fight sports, in that motor program, that videotape will only show you one permeation or one circumstance of a million different circumstances you might encounter in a fight because of a slightly different grip, a slightly stronger opponent, taller, shorter, whatever. So that's why I love the sport that I do, because it's so varied, and you always have to adapt. You can go in with a fight plan, tactics, whatever, but during the fight you have to be adaptable. And again, that's where the flow state is useful to a certain extent, because you're just reacting without thinking. Because if I start thinking too much that this person's a left-handed fighter and I need to circle that way, and then I need to do the thing that I do, I'm not in that flow state. I'm only working one step at a time. I'm reacting to the thing that person's doing, rather than in that flow state where I'm in 100% control. Even though it's a 50-50 thing, I know exactly what's going to happen next because I've drilled that thing 1,000 times, and 1,000 times my opponent will do that same thing for me to do the throw or whatever.
Yeah. So it's trained, but so it's completely reversed, but in a sense that you remain adaptable enough to apply that to the circumstance at hand, which is bringing mindfulness into. Which I guess, I don't know a great deal about martial arts, but that's one of my readings of martial arts from the outside looking in, is that there is a great degree of mental strength.
Yeah, I think so. Judo, I would say, if you try and draw the boundary between martial arts and sport, I would say judo sort of falls more on the sport boundary, but some people and some clubs, some groups do train the martial sense, if you like, the martial arts sense. And I think for judo, I think that the key thing is the resilience element, in that, some of the best fighters you will see will, and I was bad for it, I would often stop. And it comes back to that statement in there, that the need to avoid failure. Some of the best fighters they flip it. It's the need to achieve, the need to keep going. And what that looks like is someone will come in for a throw and someone will defend it. Instead of coming out and losing your dominance of position or your effort, say it's, conservation of effort, they'll then turn it into a different technique. Person will defend again. They'll turn it into a different technique. Person will defend again. And it's a relentless onslaught of attack. And that's because they're not afraid of what their opponent's going to do, because they've got an answer to it. And it comes back to the training, but that's where some of the best fighters are. And you'll see, some electrifying fights where it's almost like, again, loads of cheesy cliches, but a lot of people say, and I'm sure it's similar to any other martial art, but it's a physical form of chess, in that it's, okay, I'm moving here, okay, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to take your arm, I'm going to control your arm, okay, well, you control my arm, I'm going to move you in this direction so I can sweep your leg, and like things like that. And so it's, some of the best athletes have the opposite of the need to avoid failure. That doesn't come into their head. That doesn't even that's not on their plane. They are consistently need to achieve, how am I going to flatten this person on their back, or how am I going to choke, strangle, arm lock, or whatever. And that's going back to the flow state. For me personally, that need to avoid failure isn't just, and again, you'll know this, isn't just during the fight. That need to avoid failure almost starts all the way back to your competition prep. The way you prepare for the competition needs to be in such a way that you don't have those intrusive thoughts. Your supporters know how to support you best up to the competition and during, knowing what your triggers are, what's going to stress you out, what's going to G you up, all that sort of stuff. And so it's, the quickest way, like I said earlier, you have that kind of balance of left and right of that optimal flow state. If you're doing the positive self-talk, that's fine. But what's quite devastating and difficult to come back from is the intrusive negative thoughts. That's almost like a bit of a killer, because I know the minute I start thinking, God, I'm tired, he's looking strong.
Mm-hmm.
That throw almost caught me, and I talk about it a lot in work in my current job. But language is really important, and I've had exposure to lots of sports psychologists, and a really simple example that was used for me is if you've got someone hanging onto a rope and you're shouting at them, "Don't let go, don't let go, don't let go." The message they're hearing is kind of let go, let go, let go, rather than hold on tight, and the reinforcing message there is hold tight. And so it's coaching yourself to it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like learning experiences. Like if my opponent almost catches me, I don't think, oh shit, like this guy's going to beat me. It's okay, cool, I'm going to counter that. I know what to do now. I'm going to learn from that. But having that internal monologue when you're tired, you're getting physically hurt, and like I say, try and like bringing that needle into line is the challenge. And I think that only comes through experience. That only comes through putting yourself in those types of environments. So I can always remember when you step it up to the next level. So there's loads of levels of competition. You've got county, national, international, that sort of stuff. And it goes up World Cup, Olympic, whatever. And the minute you raise onto the next stage, you almost have to reset it, and you always do badly because there's so many more stressors and unknowns because you've not done that before. And you have to almost, it's like practising again. And what we used to do in training is try and simulate competition in training, again, and no one ever said it out loud. No one really vocalized it, that this is to help you get into flow state or your optimal performance thing. But that's what it was about. It was simulating the stresses that you'll experience in competition so that it becomes more normal to get, I guess, into that flow state when you're actually there. And I remember my first it would have been a Grand Prix, which is a sort of, one down from a World Championships, my first one of those. I had a really close fight and I should have beaten the guy, but it was my first one at that level. And I think a big element of that is that I'd sort of moved into that need to avoid failure space because of all the external pressures, like the spotlights, the music, the everything that you can't necessarily simulate back in your dojo, back at home, or in your training centre. And so I guess for like flow state, it's almost like an accumulation of you can nail flow state. Like I'd happily flow, in BJJ people call it flow rolling and stuff like that. I'd happily do that in a local club, but I wouldn't have the same flow or the same mentality if that's all of a sudden being watched pay-per-view by millions of people, all that sort of stuff. And it's the challenge for athletes. How do you get as close as possible to competition environments in a training environment? That's the battle. That's constantly, and that's what you'll see a lot of high-level teams will do. They will simulate almost to the nth degree a real match or a real competition, because the more you're in that environment, the less pressure, the less stresses that you experience, I guess. And that's, it's strange. Not many, I hear it as a lot of sports psychologists I've spoken to, it's the zone of optimal arousal, and it's that bell curve, and that's kind of how it's explained. But it doesn't get talked about that much, I'll be honest. And I think because it's such a personal thing, to each athlete. Because the last Olympics, there was a viral video that went round. It was a German Olympic girl who I know quite well, actually. She's in the military, hard as nails. But the way that she gets hyped before a fight is the coach physically hits her slap round the face.
Wow.
Slap, like one each side, couple on the arms, down the legs. And that's her thing. That every competition, doesn't matter what level competition it is, she knows that is how she gets into a, flow state, zone of optimal performance. And it's fine, we don't bat an eyelid, that's normal. I've grown up competing at similar competitions. She went to the Olympics, and this was, obviously it was, everyone saw it, and it was videoed, her walking on, getting, the steps up to the mat, and a coach, poof. Video went viral because coach beats athlete. Coach God. And you can imagine all the fallout, all the memes, and all that sort of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
But that, like I say, that is very personal to her. That is how she gets going, and she's a cracking fighter.
You talk about simulation. I mean, there's no. Well, we're animals at the end of the day. As far as if we're getting smacked around the face, it doesn't matter whether it's training, real. Yeah. You can't switch those instincts off.
It's fight or flight, instigated.
Absolutely,
I guess.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny because again, I don't want to. This isn't about me, but it's to draw parallels there with what you said about the sort of stepping up the levels. I always remember, but the first, I had a couple of commissions at the time, but so here's where I was. I had like a freezing cold old mill that we called the studio in Preston. It was like cheap rents, stone floor, Baltic in winter, but just good fun, big open space. We got a desk in there, we called it studio. And so this was in the early months of creating my portfolio, setting up my business, no clients, knocking on everyone's door, just trying to get those first breakthroughs. Got a couple in, but still, very much like a nervous wreck on any job, thinking, oh my God. So
living hand to mouth.
First proper commission, look back now, it wasn't shocking, but it was nowhere near as good as the stuff that I was doing without any pressure, but I had all the time to work on. And then I got front cover of the Guardian film and music on a Friday. That was the first commission I got for the Guardian, and I expected him to throw me in with a tiny spot illustration, but it's exactly that same experience. I spent 48 hours, shaking, and just sent this very rigid, pale comparison of the stuff that I was doing when I was just in the zone with the music on in the studio. And it's exactly what you said, which is interesting because you wouldn't ever compare illustration and judo, but it's very much the same psychology.
Yeah, it's that internal self-doubt that confines you and ultimately restricts your creativity. So at the end of the day, that's part of judo or any, fighting sport. You have to be creative, you have to adapt, you have to innovate, because that other person is trying to beat you, and so you have to be adaptable. You can't, like I say, motor program 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's you have to instantly be able to turn it into motor program 1.5 halfway through a movement, and that you cannot do that if you have got any level of self-doubt or anything distracting you from the job at hand. And I guess it's exactly the same if you. Yeah, it's.
Dare I even say conscious thought, as in any removed thought, because, like you say, it has to be about 101% focused on what's happening in front of you in your own body. Because the minute you start, like you said, the minute you got this voice going tired or big guy, whatever it might be, it's that then you've got this almost split when you can't afford a split.
But then I suppose there's an element of that, in that it's trusting your own competence, whether it's as an illustrator or as an athlete. It's trusting that you've done the hours, you've done the time, you've done the work, you've done the graft.
Yeah,
and it's that positive self-talk. But like I say, it's the minute you start having the negative thoughts, that it's being able to bring that dial back to the middle. Mm-hmm. In a conscious way, so that you then become unconscious again.
And I mean, the fact of any flow state, including this, I'm sure you'll agree, is that there's no surefire way to engineer it. You can't. There's not a button. You can't switch it on or off.
That's the most frustrating thing, and that's what I think I was trying to sort of say earlier. It's like it's almost accumulative. Like competition number 1 at that level, you won't get flow state. Competition number 2 probably won't do it. 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I might get a 5-second flash of it. Mm-hmm. But then when it becomes normalised, and you've done your, whatever, some athletes out there have done 4 Olympic Games. You've done your 4th Olympic Games, and everything pales into insignificance at that stage, because you've done it. You've got you have. I suppose there's an element of like having something to prove. I don't know whether that ties back in with your own self-worth and competence or whatever, but it's like, I think if you're doing something just to prove to yourself, there's probably a much higher chance that you're going to be able to achieve the flow state, because actually it's all about you and you're in control. Whereas if you're doing it for other people, and I think looking back at my career, it was, money's tight. I've had to like flog myself to pay for this, because it's, I wouldn't even go as far as semi-professional sport. It was an amateur sport. And so when you've, I've only got so much money this month, so I need to make this competition count. My coach is coming with me, and he's had to pay out of his own pocket, or all these external things. And this is where, and you heard it, you would have heard it. The English, I might misquote it, but the English Women's Rugby League bombed out of the semi-finals, and there's calls to make them professional because they can't compete against the other professional teams. And yes, that totally agree from a training perspective, professional, you get more time, But what you can't quantify is that the pressure that athletes will put on themselves because of the sacrifices they've had to make to be there. Whether that's family, financial, time, work, career progression. And it was only so I did my first career as a judo athlete, self-funded. And then I did my second career as a judo athlete in the army, getting paid good salary as judo athletes go. And the amount I managed to achieve in that, it was 3 years, but some of that was injured. So say 18 months I was competing effectively once I'd got up to speed and fit again. The amount I managed to achieve in that 18 months was more than, I would argue, I was competing internationally from about the age of 16 to 23, so 7 years. But that I managed to achieve more in 18 months than I did in 7 years, arguably. And there's you could always say there's a physical development curve and all that sort of stuff involved. But I think I'd put a lot of that down to the stresses of money, time. I had a safe career. I knew I could go straight back into the army. And I think that had a big part to play in probably making sure that I spent more time in this flow state when I was fighting, which is when you fight best, because I'm not worried about all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, do you know what? I think you're hitting a really good point there, the ability to remove all the niggling subconscious perspective.
Yeah. It's just you.
Thoughts.
You're just doing it for you.
Yeah, and you're able to give all of your being, mental, physical, emotional, to that, and then that gets into what you were saying about the hours of training that feed into that flow state within a match, for example. It's really interesting. I never thought about that, but you're right. Yeah, when you're balancing all these other stuff and, like you say, those pressures, it only really amplifies that negative voice, doesn't it?
But in a real world context, you're never going to have no external pressures, really, in any walk of life. So I suppose it's how do you minimise those? How do you like self-care? How do you help yourself? Come to terms with the consequences. And I suppose a lot of it is almost flipping it on its head a little bit. Is what happens if I fail? And again, I'm thinking back to old me now, who's whatever, at uni, working a part-time job and trying to train and compete internationally. What happens if I lose is I've just wasted 800 quid on flights and bombed out first fight and it's all you're almost really up against it. You're really up against it. And going back to, flow state and all this stuff comes from competing at a certain level consistently. That's where, well-funded sports programs benefit, like the Germans are very, very good. They have a military sports scheme where I think at the moment, at any one time, they've got about between 700 and 800 full-time athletes that are employed by the military. And having experienced that, in, like I say, in my second bite of the cherry at going for the Olympics, it frees you. It genuinely frees you from all the like chains of reality, because you're comfortable and you're doing it for you. And it's, I achieved so much more. I stepped up 2-3 levels. You know, and I'm sure there's some other elements to it, but I think part of it is that the lack of external stressors and real life that get in the way and weigh on your mind at the worst possible times in the middle of a fight.
Yeah, and like you say, you know, no one's free of it, because that's life. But there is something about when you've got enough things held down and you've got enough space to focus that you can compartmentalize those a bit more. Yeah, I guess. Oh, you said something there that really triggered an interesting thought, and it's gone. So we talked about momentum earlier, but I'm interested to know whether, and just from my own experience playing rugby league to a reasonable level and other sports, but there's something about that momentum of when one thing clicks and you feel good about it. And I think this is a creativity thing, but let's say, okay, to give you an example in rugby league, you know, a dummy comes off and then you give a really nice ball and you miss a man and it leads onto a try, and then you're in the zone. And there's something about that level of that, almost just gushing confidence, full aware. And you hit up on it earlier, but it's not the positive voice thing. So there's two different ways of looking at it. There's you can tell yourself you're not going to lose, or you're not going to fear failure, and the rest of it. That's very different to feeling it on some animalistic level, where you just aren't going to lose because you've got such zest and such flow. And I think, is there something, I don't know what my question is, but is that something you encounter where one thing goes right and you feel like, not necessarily creativity, but just something's gone really, you know, you've pulled off a great move or you've evaded something, and then it's like you get the hunger for more of that, and it becomes this hot streak, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few levels to that. I think just going back to like the feeling element of it, even before walking on for a fight, I will probably know whether I'm in the place to win it or not by the feeling that I feel stood at the side of the mat. And again, it comes back to all the external pressures and stuff, and it comes back to my own individual preparation and stuff. And I know that I'm ready to go on and at least fight my best fight. I get like the hairs on your neck stand up and all that sort of stuff. If I can, that's for me, that feeling, I know that I'm going to perform optimally. Whether or not the other person's better than me is a question of the fight. But I know that I'm in the best place that I am when I get the hairs on the back of your neck stood up. Right, I'm ready. And it's that in itself is practice and test and adjust and a real battle of self-talk to get you to that stage. And you'll speak to every athlete and they'll have a different way of doing it, of whether it's visualization, music, whatever. So that feeling, just I wanted to sort of pull on that thread of it 100% is a feeling. You can't yes, feelings, and again, we're going to get psychological, but feelings affect thoughts, affect behaviour, all that sort of stuff. But going back to the things clicking, I think over a long term, things clicking definitely give you a boost, like whether it's technically or whatever, and it gives you, you'll get one medal and But in terms of during the fight, it's an interesting question, because it's like it's the sense of I don't know, I suppose in a fight it's the sense of dominance, I would say, and I don't know whether that leads you into a flow state or it's the physical confirmation that you're probably wanting to tell yourself, in that, I'm stronger than this person, I'm better than this person. It's like when things click in a fight, it's almost that affirmation that you are going to win that fight. because I can break your grip, because I can turn in for this, because I can lift you up, all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to think about triggers. Yeah, I suppose there's an element of I don't know. It's difficult. It's really difficult to say and put into words.
Because I think just to flip it to another sport. So at the minute I'm fascinated about Erling Haaland and just his complete, utter destruction of anything put in front of him in the Premier League. And we talk about the top flight, and you can go on about weak defences, whatever. But when you watch someone who's at their absolute prime like that, I find it fascinating because he's going to have an off day. But when you get a streak of hat tricks like that, there's almost, and this is the thing. So in flow state, they describe it as the kind of perfect marriage of your abilities and the task at hand. It's like you hit the perfect middle ground. So you think of someone who's an absolute physical specimen like Erling Haaland, and of course, so coming on the pitch, there's a psychological fear factor for his opponents, knowing his previous record and just how damn good he is. But then for him, that's what's not to say he doesn't come on and he has a tough run against a defender and loses a bit of confidence. But it just seems that there's something about whether something clicks, whether it's gets the first goal, or just starts strong and then skins a defender a few times without actually scoring. And then it's like you said. Then I think what you said there, physical confirmation. It's almost like they've tapped into what they already had as a belief, but in a physical, non-linguistic way. And I think that's interesting, especially as someone who's in a field where I don't necessarily have competition. It's always competing against myself because I've got an individual style. But it's that, I would liken that to when my pen hits the paper. If I like the first mark that I make, I'm in the flow state now. And now I don't have to think about it anymore because there's just something I can't articulate with language that comes about with the way that I move, and the way my mind synchronises with my hand. And it's just, again, it's not sport, but it's still physical, and it's still
it's what I set out to do happened. And it's that confirmation, and if that loop continues to, I suppose I don't know whether it fits into flow state, because I suppose if you're thinking about that action and the outcome and blah, 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 maybe you're thinking too deeply, but that probably leads you to flow state, I guess.
I think that's it. I think it's the feeling, because what happens with the blank page thing, certainly in my world, is that, God, if I get the first mark wrong, or if I write and I'm not feeling it, I could be days before I get back there sometimes. But then, I sometimes will have to ask the client for a slight extension if I know that it's possible. But perversely, the other way around, once it, like I say, it's a conscious thought of action, but then once the feeling and the unarticulatable, I don't know if that's the right thing, but it just, then it becomes feeling and motion and all these lovely fluid things that can't necessarily be described.
It's almost, it's the, I guess it's the unknown. And so what I always say, and there's a really good documentary about it. What's it called? All about cycling doping, and then it goes into the Russian Olympic doping scandal. I can't remember what it is, but it starts about cycling. What I've always said is that I've fought lots and lots of people, and the minute you first grip up with someone, I can tell you with fairly good certainty. So, take away, what they look like, how big they are, just give me a pair of arms behind a screen. When they grip up on my gi, I can probably tell you how hard a time I'm going to have fighting them.
Right.
But by the feeling. And it's kind of like that first stroke. I will feel their pressure on my sleeve or on my lapel, and I'll think, oh God, this is going to be a tough fight. And looking back, they were mainly Russian. They mainly had large chins and large gaps in the teeth and big brows. But that going back to that feeling, that first thing, when I place my hand on someone and you feel that on you, and you're like, it's that I've got my grip. And how we talk about it in judo is that, you've got you're the motor, you're the car, you're the engine, but the only way that you can transmit your energy and your like power and everything you want to do is rubber on the road, and so you need to get your tyres or whatever to hit the road, and you know, that's how you transmit your power, is by getting grip of someone. If you've got no grip, if you've got no tyres, or they're not hitting the road, then you're not going to be able to transmit any of that power. And so that idea of momentum is, you know, the very first act, you know, and I'm bouncing all over the place now, but for positive self-talk, when I'm having a hard time, there's 3 very simple things you need to do in judo: grip, move, throw. Grip, move, throw. And that was how I got myself back to the centre. It's those 3 words. Because if I'm really tired and I'm starting to lose that kind of, you know, that need to avoid failure voices coming in, grip, move, throw. And grip's that first word. And that's the momentum. If I can grip, I can move them. If I can move them, I can throw them. And so I suppose that's kind of maybe like where I get a very positive feeling or negative feeling, depending on how well I've been able to grip them and how strongly they're gripping me. And that's where it builds. That's where it builds to, I've got my grip. I've got my favourite grip. And they're moving how I want them to. They're moving how I've practiced. And it gives you that, and this is where the motor program really steps in, is I've practiced this particular grip with my opponent doing that exact step 1,000 times. I'm in before I know it, because it's the smallest of feelings. I know that the opponent's doing, as they're doing that, their foot's only going to move 6 inches, but that's enough for me. That's enough time for me to get my whole body in and lift them up with what I want to do, with what I've practiced 1,000, you know, tens of thousands of times. But it all starts because I've gripped and moved. When you're, and I suppose it may be similar, if you're in illustration, you can sometimes find yourself in a spiral of like, you know, judo context. I'm tired, he's strong. And just having a very simple technique to bring you back out. I'm a bit out of practice because I've not competed since 2018, but I'm remembering my stuff now. But yeah, grip, move, throw was a really important thing for me.
Processional grounding, isn't it? But again, all with the aim of finding that floor space again. So it's not something very, what you say, it's step by step, pen by numbers. But that's critical to get there. And much like it is, it's the same for me. I've still got to sit down, I've got to pick up my pen, I've got to get the right sheet of paper, and I've got to know what I'm setting out to do, all very conscious thought. But the way I'll hold that pen, as opposed to someone who hasn't done the 10,000 hours, which is, you know, the craft thing, will be, it might be, but it's the margins, it's the finest of margins. So, and I don't even consciously know it, but you know, my nib's caked in ink. It's really stuck in the pen holder. Yeah. To anyone else, it's knackered. You know. So, but to me, I know the way that ink, the tiniest bit of ink is going to run off. And now articulating it feels weird. It's because it's where language fails almost again. It's I'm totally attuned to that object and that thing, much like you would be with your hands and your arms. But what's interesting there is I spoke to John McGuinness for this podcast, who's like arguably the best of all time in time trial racing, 23 Isle of Man TT championships, and he describes himself as just a brickie from Morecambe who could ride bikes. His dad ran a bike workshop, exposed to it from an early age, totally attuned with his bike. But he talks, when I met him, he'd recently done these research experiments with Apple, and I forget how they were recording, but he was like the heart rate and his pulse rate when he was hitting these land speed records for a lap. I think it was 132 miles an hour on the bike. But he was the calmest of the lot. His heart rate was the lowest, resting lowest. And he was like, and he said that's the difference between the 2 or 1 seconds that will win him a championship over his nearest competitor. I find that truly fascinating because that's so meta. You know? Yeah,
well, they were talking about it on, I can't even remember where it was, but they were talking about Freddie Flintoff, who's on Top Gear. And they were doing some crazy challenge, stupid speed or whatever. They strapped him up with heart rate monitors, And, you know, all the other presenters, heart rate through the roof, doing crazy stuff. Freddie Flintoff, he like almost like flipped the vehicle or whatever. And he was like cruising at like, you know, whatever, you know, 100 beats per minute. And he was just about to die or something like that. And I think it's almost that blocking out of everything other than the task. You know, clearly he's thinking, I just need to control this car a little bit better. Whereas others might be thinking, I'm about to die, sort of thing, and that's where, you know, when adrenaline increases, the fight or flight thing is really unhelpful when you're trying to do something as precise as drive a car or illustrations or throw someone. What I've found is that having done the 10,000 hours, that kind of concept of where you get to the point where sometimes you can't articulate why you do things. You do them because they work. Do you find, so my experience, I cannot teach beginners. I can only teach sort of elite-ish athletes or, you know, national level athletes, say, or whatever. Because I find it really difficult to explain to a beginner who's come from a background of knowing nothing, to explain exactly why I do the things or the way that you should do things. Do you find that the same with, if you were to explain to someone how you illustrate and, you know, illustration 101, do you think that you do yourself justice? Because you're talking about, you know, that cake, like you can't quantify like the nib being caked and stuff. You can't say, oh, well, it needs to be 5/8 caked in ink.
No, you know what? I think you are. I think you're right there, because I think there's something about, and I wouldn't even put like an academic tier on it, but it has to be a person who's found a love for the thing, at least. I think. I just think there's a big difference between, let's say, someone who's 13 and then doing an art class because they've been told to go in an art class. Yeah. There might be one person in there who really clicks with something I said, but ultimately it's very much basic draft skills. Yeah. Whereas someone, let's say they're on BTEC or a degree, or even just come at a time in their life when they really want that and they know they want that for the right reasons for them, then they're attuned on a different level, I think, and they're likelier then to take something.
Perceive it.
Yeah, because you're right. There's a certain degree of subconscious learning, really, for all of us. Yeah. So when you're so far down that hours scale, then there's a big disparity between that and somebody who is just coming to it and maybe doesn't even understand what it is.
I mean, I am half contradicting myself in the sense that those 10,000 hours need to be deliberate practice. So if it wasn't deliberate, like in order to be deliberate, you need to know exactly what you're doing. So there's a slight struggle with me there in that, you know, I've done everything deliberately, but sometimes it's probably because my coach has told me that's how to do it, and I've just that now works for me. Yeah, but
there's something as well about. And I can often see it on like the faces of students who will come to a lecture, for example, if I go into a guest talk at university. I remember I had a girl called Hazel Mead, who's a really good illustrator now, and she was studying at Coventry at the time, and I think her mum had got her my book for Christmas one year, and she had a real get-up-and-go attitude, and she emailed me saying, can I come and see you at your studio? I'd love to ask you a few questions, say hello, loved your book. And I always had the door open policy when I had my studio in London, so I was like, yeah, of course, come and have a cup of tea, because I'm just passionate about what I do, so it's fun to share. But she was a great example of someone who was just ready to hear it all and was tapped into a different level of learning, because she was on a third year of a degree, and it wasn't the fact that she was on that third year, but actually there was just something in her that had connected with the art form, and she wanted to know all those little nuances and how I got into these certain headspaces. So she was just soaking up everything I had to say, which is a great feeling, and in turn it brings more out of me. Yeah. You know, so I'm giving more and more, because I know she's listening and learning.
And I suppose that's quite a funny point. Is I have been coaching before. And when people ask the question why, and you have to articulate the why, it makes you a better practitioner. Yeah. Because you have to actually challenge your own, 10,000 hours and be like, okay, no, that I think this is why I do it. Yes, this is why I do it. And you confirm it to yourself, and it's almost that little bit of challenge that you need, I guess. Because to voice out, I point my toes or my foot this way because it gives me more rotation, and that means my opponent can't do this. That sort of thing, and it's it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Whereas I find that when someone, and I don't know if you find this too, but when someone is maybe not advanced enough, as in they're just getting in and it's the nuts and bolts basics that they need, the mindset I find at that stage is often, how do I get to where he is? Give me a simple answer.
Yeah, I want the shortcuts.
And then when that's not there, then it's almost like they have to go through that difficult time of going the long road.
So it turns out,
and I include my younger self in that bracket. Like I remember the first year at design college when we had the art history sessions, I was still flicking bits of paper across at my mate and kicking the back of someone's chair and not paying attention or laughing at a mannerism that the lecturer has done, and it's like, you little dickhead. But then that's where I was, and it's like, and it didn't mean that I wasn't passionate in other modules. It's just that I wasn't ready to see the broader sphere of why that was also as important as the craft itself. And it's like, so I guess it feeds into that psychology as well. But it's all very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you started at, was it 4? You said?
I started at the age of 5.
Wow.
I was not very good at ball sports. The bloke at Cub shouted too much, ironically, in the army now. And I was pretty small. I was like the small. I've still got a photo upstairs. Me in my primary school, and how they do it by height order. I was the smallest kid in class. Smaller than all the girls as well. I think it was a little bit of self-defense stuff that my mum chucked me at. But yeah, it was just. I think there's an element of good coaches and also just a flair for it. I think a little bit. Well, no, actually, I lie. That's bigging myself up. I didn't have a flair for it. I just worked bloody hard, and then it clicks, and it comes back to that momentum thing. I got this one big medal, and it was so long ago. It's difficult to understand what technically clicked, and it might have just been that I realised that judo was a fight sport. I had to be tough, and you had to be mean. There's like a killer. There has to be a mean element. You can't be the nice. I was, very fortunate, great parents, nice upbringing. You're not a natural fighter with that. And what you'll see is, Middle Eastern countries, Cuba, Russia, like where fighting is either part of the culture or part of their upbringing, they are fantastic on the mat because there's not that there isn't, maybe even comes back to the flow state thing of they've been in so many fights, whether it's, mentally or physically through their lives, that judo match is just another fight.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for me, growing up as a nice kid, fairly, middle class, all that sort of background, nice school, blah, blah, fighting was foreign. Fighting was what I did for fun.
It's the desperation thing.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
it's a huge part of it. I started someone flag this up recently about the sort of the not to name any particular names, but like in football, when there's so much money, you get a kid who's 17 years old, not had too much struggle in their life, and then they're on 100k a week. Whereas the desperation vanquishes pretty quick.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's I've been as a kid, teenager, you go to training camps abroad. It'd be like, oh, watch out for the Kazakh team. They'll steal your flip flops. They do. Still. I was in. Where was I? It was in 2018. I was in. It was in Peru, and I'd gone on, fought my fight, won it or whatever. Come off, and back to the warm up mat where I was like, they're not even nice flip flops. Like, I think I got them second hand. It's that bad. And I was looking, and I was like, oh, I've left in the heat of whatever. I've left him somewhere. And I go, and I forget what. I managed to find some other footwear or whatever. Go back up to the stands, and I turn around, and the girl behind me is wearing my flip flops. But that's the type of environment. Like they don't have, like, I've been to lots of different countries now and fought lots of in training camps and in competitions, lots of people. And you can tell the difference. I remember fighting one of the world's best, Georgian. He had a crazy name, Shavkat Juashvili or something like that. And I was fighting him at a training camp in Turkey, and I was fighting him on you do standing and on the ground fighting, and I was fighting him on the ground, and I started to get the better of him, and he world ranked number 5 or whatever, and I was something in the the high 70s, and I started to get the better of him on the ground, and something flicked. He all within the rules, but he had another level of viciousness that he unleashed on me. And that's where that resilience thing comes in, of the martial arts side, the mental side of, if I show an ounce that I'm about to crack, or that I'm finding this painful, or that I'm finding his aggressiveness uncomfortable, again, background of white middle class, not too much hardship, it comes back to that, having to put yourself in that scenario over and over again of being physically beaten and like actual pain. I've been in a couple of fights of that, like that before. I've also dished out a few of those where I've needed to be extra violent to beat my opponent. That's another element when it comes to a fight sport, is that just some of the physical pain, and it's not a fight sport, I suppose any contact sport really. Well, no, I won't even go that far. You can be in the hurt locker or doing a marathon. The physical pain, to separate that from the what's going on mentally, is really difficult. But how I experience that is the aggressiveness, viciousness of someone who you don't know really on a personal level, but is trying to hurt you, and trying to rationalise that in your head that it's and again, sometimes if you're in a competition, you're looking at the ref thinking, are you going to let him get away with that?
Yeah,
like he's just smacked me, or he's just and all of those things are taking you away from that flow state. And so it's and again, this comes back to almost gamesmanship, I guess, is, and you see it a lot in football. I don't really follow football, but you see it a lot in football. For every time that player is looking at the referee to act up to something, they're not in their flow state. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're too busy trying to play up to the referee. And it's the same with judo, in that if I'm too busy looking at the referee thinking, hoping that he's going to say, oh, naughty, that's too vicious. Yeah. I'm not thinking about how I'm going to beat him. I'm thinking about the gamesmanship advantage that I'm trying to get by a penalty and all this sort of stuff.
Does your challenge then become to almost to consume all of those frustrations and that aggressive approach and turn it into your own flow state, to hit a sort of positive response?
So this my coach was very, very old school. He was German, Olympic team, but like really, really old. Like I think he's from West Germany, no, East Germany, but like very, very old school. And it was towards the end of my career, unfortunately, but he sat me down and said, he noticed, so he was the same coach before and after I joined the army. He noticed when I came back from the army, I could tap into another level of aggressiveness and viciousness, because I'd been and done some stuff and had some teaching and I don't know, I'd had a mindset change from the pleasant university student to someone who, could be asked to go kill someone. And so that had created a different athlete that he saw. But he still said he needed more from me. I had to be more, and what he experienced, and it was actually at the first Grand Prix fight that I did. He noticed that I got hit with quite a vicious opponent, and it was a nasty piece of work. And it's not even accepting it or being able to like tolerate it or whatever. You need to be prepared to meet it. You need to be able to give yourself, go to that next level of physicality and brutality, because if you don't, you're just going to get beaten up. Mm-hmm. And that is almost a trick of the mind, in the sense that, you need, if you've not, and again, I've been quite fortunate in life. I've had some tragedy, but nothing too horrific. To get yourself in a state where you want to physically hurt someone and brutalise them in order to win that fight. Don't get me wrong, fight or flight. If someone's trying to kill me, it's a different story, I'm sure. Touch wood. But when you're in a sport where it's mutual respect and all this sort of stuff, and it's rules of the game, it's really difficult to be able to switch that on. And that's something the coach said, if I'm going to succeed bigger than where I had been, I had to find that next level. And unfortunately, I retired shortly after, so I don't know if I ever would have found that next level. But that's something that really challenged me, is that someone's brutality and aggressiveness can really throw you out, can really throw you out off your game, just by, almost you thinking, oh gosh, that's unfair. In that internal monologue of...
and again, this is again, but I find it an interesting parallel. I want to just, for my sort of core, should I release a podcast for my core audience? I don't, on a thematic level, is that any different to someone who's got, let's say, an arsehole art director, or somebody they're working under who's using aggressive tactics in a different way?
Yeah, maybe
psychologically, mentally, but it's the same thing when suddenly your confrontation appears right in front of you, and it's blocks to what you. It's really interesting.
It's the accepted rules of the game, and whether it's sport, business, or whatever, there's a level of etiquette, or there's rules, or there's but to gain an unfair advantage, within sport is called gamesmanship. But as in business, that happens all the time. Like the need for profit, loopholes, whatever, and it's really difficult to not let that affect you.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that like we were going back to earlier, it's all about you, and someone being an arsehole, boss, competitor, whatever. If you let that affect you, that's taking you out of kilter from what you do best. And so it's if you stick true to your values, stick true to knowing what you're good at and delivering on that. Maybe this is the virtuous side of me, the optimist, but I'd like to think you'll still succeed. But it's when you let that person who, it's when you let that person that person's actions influence your thinking.
Yeah, your challenge has to become internalised, doesn't it? It has to be, right, okay, I'm still in the challenge that I was in. There's new parameters. Actually, I can still succeed and better myself by responding. Yeah, it's and I think again, you're right. The experience always, like, the experience makes you better in those circumstances.
Yeah.
Than the broader range of challenges you face in that regard. Big thank you to Alex Paske, judoka, for taking the time after a training session where we sat down and had a cup of tea and got into that beautiful topic of flow. If you haven't read Csikszentmihalyi's Flow, it's wonderful. It's a great book, really goes into depth on this, and looks at it through the lens of many people, through climbers, rock climbers, and artists, and all kinds of angles on it. And I also did an episode, which I'll share the link on the socials, with Professor Anna Abraham about flow. She's works at Georgia University, and she is a specialist. She's a neuroscientist specialising in creativity, and she's awesome. She's a lovely woman. She's also in the book, so get your copy now. Please do leave give us a subscription. Leave us a little rating and a review on the channels, please, if you get the chance. It really, really helps the show. It helps garner trust in passers-by who might want to dip into that many, many million strong, bank of podcasts in the world now and choose this one. So it means a lot. This is my cause, elevating creativity in society. That's why I write books. It's why I do this show on a weekly basis when I probably should be doing more lucrative work. I'm also developing the coaching model that is coming together. Some of the aspects of it, the workshop is now nearing completion. Just need to get the assets put together for that, and I can start rolling out and advertising it and getting it out there. It's going to be an intensive look at creativity, what it is, what it means, how you can embrace yours. Very excited about this new direction. So get in touch if you're interested in that. I've had a few people express interest. That's very, very exciting. give me a shout. Happy for pitches on this show. Like I mentioned last week, not everyone is happy to take pitches for their podcast show. They're a bit more protective than I am, but I'm wide open. I've had some of my favourite guests through PR companies who've sent me opportunities and the like. So give me a shout if you're doing something you're into and you want to talk about it. Let me know. Well up for it. Weekly show means I've got to produce a lot of content. So I hope you enjoyed Alex Paske today. We've got Yasmin Ali coming up. Check out Yasmin's book, Power Up, a look at the global energy system. She's a chemical engineer working in renewables, and we're talking about the creativity required to get to where we need to go with clean energy, and it's fascinating stuff. Really interesting. Professor Carl Chin, historian specialising in the English working class, coming up. That's a great chat too. That's a topic I really want to get under the skin of. Also, loads going on. I'm also still an illustrator, don't forget that. I do need illustration work as well. So if you're a designer, art director, get in touch. Need some projects at the minute, so give us a shout on that one. Anyway, that's enough from me. Enjoy the Olympics opening ceremony this week. I hope this gets you in the mood. Cheers to Alex again. Thank you to the founding sponsor, illustrationx.com, and the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua, doing great work to support the Ukrainian creative community at such a shocking time. Have a brilliant week, guys. Stay creative. Take care.